This video is a drastic departure from what you will normally encounter on my channel. Film study pieces with focusing on the film and the gameplay and the techniques that were displayed for either the Ravens, Lions, Seahawks, or otherwise. I spent a significant amount of time in the offseason attempting to create a new offensive metric that focuses on efficiency. To judge offensive efficiency for a one game piece of information. This is a custom created metric with a formula that is meant to be normalized to produce a one game score between 0 and 100. I believe that most scores will be clustered between the 44 to 65 range, somewhere in that area. The idea of this is to break away from looking at traditional stats, but also break away from looking at some of the predictive or expected models that are out there that are quality and they do offer a lot of information that's useful. I wanted to look at efficiency and I wanted to look at it based on things that actually happened on the field, not expected or things above replacement. So, total yards, for example, in a traditional sense, can be impacted by field position. Passing touchdowns can be impacted by game situation. Those are elements that I do value, and I think you probably do too, but I am attempting to encapsulate efficiency in a very customized and specific way. And when I say efficiency, I mean for the entirety of the offense. This formula will include completion percentage, a quarterback stat, and some older data like yards per carry, but that'll be for the whole team. I'll cover the 10 categories later. There's actually an 11th that I would basically consider a subtraction category. There's a possibility that a team could get a 105 with a perfect performance in each of the 10 or 10 plus 1 categories being 11. I call it Toer, total offensive efficiency rating. I did have to adjust, tweak, and in some cases manipulate the rating scale and the categories and the criteria within each. It involved a ton of research on my own, as well as 3 or 4 friends who looked at specific things for me, especially looking for average output or numbers for each of the 10 categories. This kind of started in my mind, to be honest with you, when looking at Ravens and Lions film in 2024 in the offseason, but really a reflection on the Bills. Those are the three teams that caused my brain to start to think about this. For example, Buffalo was not only highly productive on offense, but they didn't turn the football over, and that could be a control feature for them in the playoffs. So when it came down to a playoff situation, they could keep the volume turned up on their offense, the ability to generate yards and possibly points, while keeping the static down. Now look, the Ravens only committed 11 turnovers in the regular season. Detroit did commit 15, slightly more. For whatever reason, when the Lions in the last 2 or 3 years under Ben Johnson, when they turned the ball over, it seemed to happen in clusters, right? 2 or 3 in a game. For Buffalo to average 30 points per game and only have 9 turnovers, I thought that was insane. So that efficiency, I wanted to find a way to metric. I wanted to find a way to measure, excuse me. I love a lot of the new metrics that's out there. EPA, DVOA. I like the EPA stuff, especially when I do personnel based videos, because you can look at information based on 11 personnel, 12 personnel, what have you. DVOA is spectacular also. I wanted something geared and completely focused and upfront and honest about it towards efficiency. Points scored is still a factor here, but it'll be represented by points per drive. So that's offensive points per drive, actually. I wanted to be able to attract, at the end, I'm going to also talk about another angle or layer of this. I want to be able to look at efficiency allowed by a defense, not just points per game allowed and various other stats that are out there. So part of this is meant to be honest with you, somewhat predictive in terms of what efficiency rating a defense typically allows per week versus what actually occurs when they face, for example, a great offense like the Ravens, Lions, Bills, three teams that we expect to have a high level offense. That's long term, the defensive part, and something that I'll need to speed up my own process during the week to gather. This is something I'm committed to, and I intend to present on Tuesday nights for the entire league. So I will talk about one game in particular for this metric, and I'm going to present the 10 categories here in a moment. I believe the 10 categories are granular and scaffolded, if you will, meaning The categories are rewarding teams who get well and above a league average for each of the 10 categories. But I want to talk about the Ravens and the Bills game in week 4 from 2024. Additional to that, Detroit had 2 blowout wins over the Titans and Jags, where the Ravens' offense in the week 4 win over the Bills and Detroit's offense in those 2 aforementioned blowout wins was damn near perfect. I wanted to be able to, while qualitatively, maybe that's the wrong word, judge games like that versus the Ravens' AFC division loss in Buffalo. Here's what I mean. When Baltimore went and lost to the Bills in the AFC divisional round matchup, they put up 416 total yards. They averaged 7.3 yards per play. They scored on 3 of their 4 drives in the second half. Scored 3 touchdowns on the road, which was clutch. The 3 turnovers, I wanted to capture them in a way that's not binary. So I guess binary isn't the right word, but 3 turnovers is drastically different than 1. You should not be in the game like the Ravens were when you have 3 turnovers on the road against a team that didn't turn the football over at all. So hopefully you get the point here, and if I'm doing a poor job explaining it, my apologies. I wanted a way to grab a score that aggregates 10 important categories, and I'll present you with those now. They'll scroll through here for a final score. The idea that I initially thought, the goal that I had was for an average score to be in the 60 to 63 range. What ended up happening on the first run through, and I utilized a lot of AI websites. I used 3 different ones in particular to kind of gather information, number one, and test some of my categories and criteria against themselves. What ended up happening in the first iteration was an average score after one tweak was a 56.4. And that was based on some yearly data that I was able to compile manually myself for the Ravens, Lions, Bills, Seahawks, and then Eagles and Chiefs later on. Now, what's since come about, or what's since occurred, is someone who has been a huge blessing to me in my Lions Discord was able to create a custom built website for me. And it basically found out or determined that the actual mean of all 32 teams for the 2024 season of a Toer ranking, utilizing all 10 or 11 categories, was a 50.57. So it's a little, what I ended up creating in the end was a little bit more stringent or strict, if you will, than perhaps my intentions originally. Based on what I have set up now, a Toer ranking somewhere above 62 is going to give you a really good shot to win a football game. Anything above 68 seems to give you an excellent opportunity to win the game. And in fact, later on in this video, I will give you guys some comparisons to historically great offenses like the 2013 Broncos, the 2007 Patriots. Unfortunately, I was unable to get information on the 99 and 2000 St. Louis Rams with Mike Martz, Kurt Warner, Marshall Faulk. Some of that data, for whatever reason, going so far back on the website, was when I did access it, it kind of looked inconsistent to me, such that I didn't want to trust it and put it out there, and I didn't want to compare that team to some of the ones that I mentioned. I forgot a couple: 2016 Falcons, 2018 Kansas City Chiefs, when Mahomes, I think, threw for 51 or 52 touchdowns. Anything above 68. Here's some data, some information that I got. A Toer rank one game score above 68 provided in 2024 teams with a record of 43-5. So an 87% winning percentage for a Toer score of 68 or more. Now, if you go, and this next one I'm giving you is only for the best teams that I provided there. So this is Ravens, Lions, Chiefs, Bills, Eagles. Those 5 teams went a combined 64-23. Seahawks as well. My apologies there. This is 2024 regular season. 6 teams that won 10-plus football games, only one of which didn't make the playoffs. In this case, it's the Seahawks. And, of course, 2 teams that went to the Super Bowl, the Chiefs and the Eagles. If you had a score under 44 with that group of teams, the record was 9-7. There's still, I think it's important to mention the overall winning percentage for those teams, 64 and 23, is like a 73% win percentage overall. So 9-7 looks like a decent record, but again, it's only taken from the top 5 or 6 teams in the league, or 5 of the top 6 or 8 teams in the league, I should say. I'm not sure where you would categorize the Seahawks. Who cares for this discussion? The point is, 3 of those wins were by the Chiefs in games where they had a Toer ranking of below 44, which would be pretty subpar. And in fact, one of them was a 41, the other one was a 39. Already talked about Toer scores above 68, having an 87% win percentage, and scores below 44. Again, those are from the best teams. And we're going to talk about standard deviation and mean here in a couple of moments. I do want to make sure that I give credit to Ty and to another person. My wife initially agreed to aggregate a lot of this information for me on Mondays. She's a Excel genius. She had agreed to get a lot of these scores and tabulate them. She had created a Excel format with formulas where basically we could just input the data, and the formula, the Toer ranking, the Toer score would automatically be compiled and automatically be sorted in order from least to greatest with the teams applied as well. And then lo and behold, someone in my Lions Discord, Ty, wrote the website that I'm going to show you guys here in a moment that I think is pretty amazing. You will probably be a little disappointed by what I'll say next. I'm not going to give everyone access to it unless they're people that are in my Discord, because it's something that I intend to use for this data discussion. It's a pretty unique website, in my opinion, that provides a shit ton of information. It feels borderline unfair to be able to find this information so quickly. Let's go through some of the rankings here. And keep in mind, the way that this is created is this is one game scores, Toer score, but then averaged out. So there's a little bit of a loss, if you ask me, of intention. My intention is not really to get a year-long score. My intention is to get a series of one-game scores for teams. And of course, the Ravens, Lions, and Bills, 3 of the teams that I mentioned, are right at the top of these rankings. I'll slow that down a little bit so you guys can see the teams a little bit longer. In terms of Toer efficiency, for 2024, the Ravens were at the tops, followed by the Lions. The Chiefs are considerably lower, which may surprise some people. Of course, they made the Super Bowl when they went 15-2. And so when I ran this data initially for the Chiefs, I had a 61.2. And then when Ty wrote the website code, script, whatever you want to call it, for me, it pulled it automatically 63.81. I manually went back and checked it, and sure enough, that was correct. Now, the Eagles were at 67. It's important to note something about that. I omitted their Week 18 game when they sat starters because of, and then additional to that, there's a really low, the score in Week 18 was against the Giants. It's a 34, so incredibly low. Along with that, taken in mind for the Eagles' overall score for the season of 67, which seems lower, obviously, than the Ravens, Lions, and Bills. When you compare it to historically great offenses later on, it'll reflect in a more accurate light, number one. Number two, the Eagles won games against the Packers and the Tampa Bay Bucks in Week 1 and 4 with a score of 41 and 42. They also defeated the Ravens on the road, I think in Week 14 or 15, with a Toer of 41. Lost later on in the season to the Commanders with a Toer of 28. So there's a significant amount of low scores by that Eagles offense that I think paints that 67 in a little bit more positive light. There's a whole bunch of scores of 74 and above, which 74 is a really great ranking according to the categories and the criteria that I've set up. Let's talk about the Chiefs a little bit. They had a pair of 19-17 wins later in the season, weeks 13 and 14, against the Raiders and the Chargers. If we omitted those 2 games from their average score, they would have been at, I believe, 68.3. Additional to that, Kansas City sat a ton of starters in Week 18, lost 38-0 to the Broncos, and their Toer average plummeted, right? It scared me a little bit to have such a low ranking for them with this rating scale being as they went 15-2. That seemed low. But then on second glance and then researching more information, I think I spent 3 days, 3 entire days research out of my time, what free time I did have, looking at the Chiefs data and trying to make sure that it was accurate and really represented what was there for the Toer ranking. They only finished 15th in the NFL in per game offensive scoring, 22.6. The third day of running the data, I was satisfied with the Chiefs information, even though I recognize that if some Chiefs fans pay attention to this, they're probably not going to like it because obviously they're quite low. I want to talk about scores in or near the average range. Again, the website, which I will reveal to you guys in a moment and just show you some of the powerful information that's available. It found the average, or the mean, I should say, statistically at 50.57. I'm going to talk about scores in the range of 44 to 64 here. Now, the Ravens with the number one spot in the league. Here's something interesting. Whenever the Ravens scored below a 65, now 64 is one standard deviation above the mean. The standard deviation ended up being like 14.23, something like that. So 64, roughly, 64, 65 is one standard deviation above the mean. When the Ravens were below 65, they were 0-4. That's week 2 against the Raiders, week 8 road loss to the Browns, second division loss in Pittsburgh in week 11, and then the home loss to the Eagles 3 weeks later. Their average score in those 4 losses was 54.75. That's pretty revealing when you take in light of the fact that the Chiefs were winning games, one of which was in the 30s for their offensive Toer score, 39. They won another one with a 41. Baltimore actually had a 68 in the week 1 opening loss to Kansas City. 66, excuse me. I think I got that one wrong in quotation. The Lions only had one game in this range. That's the 44 to 64 range. Lions had, I think it was a 56 or a 58 in their week 2 home loss to the Bucs. Interestingly, the Bucs seemed to show up as a team consistently throughout the year that defensively brought down many of these teams' one-game Toer score. Anyway, with the group of teams that we had, those top 6 teams that I named to you, any score in the 45 to 64 range, which I believe, once again, overlaps or encompasses the statistical mean, and a lot of one standard deviation above and below the mean. Really, I've cut it off a little bit. One standard deviation below the mean would be like 40.13 or 40.12. But in any case, those 6 teams with a score between 44 and 64, they were 16-8. Seems pretty good, right? It's a 66% winning percentage. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to give you another output of scores later in that same range for the rest of the entire league. Now, the interesting part here is, for an average score in this metric that I have, between 44 and 64, the Chiefs were 4-0, the Eagles were 6-0. The 2 teams that met in the Super Bowl, basically, they could afford a down day defensively, and they could still win a football game. And in fact, win some football games against other quality opponents. They were 10-0, Chiefs and Eagles, in the regular season in what I believe to be the average range, between 44 and 64, where I believe roughly about 64 to 65% of the data is going to lie. If you know anything about statistical determinations or statistical output, one standard deviation above and below the mean is roughly going to be 68% or 68.4, something like that. The Bills were 2-2 in this score range, while the Ravens, like I said earlier, they were 0-4. Some interesting notes on that range, which again envelops or covers the mean of 50.57. Teams in that range, 44 to 64, Toer, went 90-82 in 2024, the entirety of the league. I'm able to find that information because of the website that Ty wrote for me, created based upon my request in the Lions Discord, which was amazing. I didn't even know he was doing it. One day it just pops up, and I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened here? You just eliminated 80% of my workload, and my wife's Monday mornings totally changed in terms of what she'll be doing. So all teams across the entirety of the NFL scoring between 44 and 64 on this data metric were 90-82. Doesn't seem like a very powerful thing, but again, we're in the average range, in my opinion, or somewhere in the average range. but there's a lot of carryover there. 33 times there were two teams that faced each other in the same game that scored in that range. So there's a little bit of a graying, smudging maybe, of that 90 and 82 record. So let's do it this way. When both teams scored between 44 and 64 on the metrics that I have accumulated or put together here, the team with the higher Toer ranking went 27 and 6. I do have some teams to present some interesting data on. I will run this normal distribution once again for you guys to see it. It'll alternate between this view that you see here currently and then that one, which has essentially the mean is red, 50.57. One standard deviation above and below the mean is the green line. Two standard deviations above and below is yellow. No one made it to 3 standard deviations above or below the mean. So let's talk about the Cleveland Browns. First of all, they were the worst offense in the league by far, according to this metric. Others may be different. They were 21.4. There is they're the one data point I think that's over 2 standard deviations from the mean. It's like negative 2.1 or negative 2.16 as a z-score. Anyway, the Browns, the worst offense in the league, a Toer average of 21.4. They did have 3 games in the 44 to 64 range offensively for the entire year. Keep in mind, Cleveland went 3 and 14 in the regular season. But the 3 times where they scored between 44 and 64 on the Toer ranking system, they went 2 and 1. Carolina Panthers 5 and 12 in the regular season. They ended up 23rd in the NFL in points scored per game. 4 of their 5 wins were in overtime. So even when they did get wins, they scratched them out. I want to talk about 3-week stretch for Carolina where they scored in this range. Now, actually, one of them is slightly outside the range, but I'm still going to use it for purposes of this discussion. Carolina, of course, improved over the course of the 2024 season. From week 12 to week 14, the Panthers faced the Chiefs, Bucks, and Eagles. Those 2 teams, Kansas City, Tampa Bay, Philly, they went 39 and 15 in the regular season. The Panthers in all 3 of those games were in the mid-range, near the statistical mean of Toer. 59 was their Toer in a 30 to 27 loss to the Chiefs. I think that was at home. The next one is lower, just outside of our range. It's a 42, but I'm using it for purposes of the larger point here. It's a 42, so just outside of our range, but still within 1 standard deviation below the mean. A 26-23 loss to the Bucks in week 13. Then the Eagles, the eventual Super Bowl champion. Carolina had a 46 Toer, and they fell, of course, to Philly 22-16. My point is, there seems to be a strong correlation, even for the bad teams, in being competitive, if not exceeding their typical win rate when they score at, above, or perhaps just below a Toer of 50.57, the statistical mean. I did think that the data for the overall NFL record would be better than a 90 and 82 record, but like I said, there's a lot of overlap. 66 of those games had both teams score between a 50 and let me rephrase it. 33 of those games, my apologies, had both teams score between 50 and 64. I may have slightly misspoke earlier, my apologies. So between 50 and 64 on the Toer ranking system, there were 33 games where both teams had that score. And the team with the higher Toer earned the win 27 out of those 33 times. Forgive me for stumbling over that point, but hopefully in the end it made a little bit more sense. I do want to talk about some of the other teams that in the top 10 ranking, specifically the Bills. So the Bills are at 71.2. Just behind the Lions, like I said earlier. Their overall score is obviously weighed down by that 0 in week 4 against the Ravens. Now, that one also caught my mind when this was being created and spent, I don't know how many hours, probably at least 3 or 4, considering that game, running multiple variations of the Toer metric. I had 4 different Google documents saved with different grade scales, grading criteria for each category, figuring out, okay, was that too harsh? Now, I think it ended up actually being a 4 at the end, 4 out of 100. But consider some of the traditional stats for the Bills in that Week 4 game. 236 total yards, 4.1 yards per play, 1 turnover. That was the strip sack of Josh Allen by Kyle Van Noy on a trick play. Allen finished 17 of 31 passing for only 155 yards. They gave up 3 sacks, 4 offensive penalties. That to me is an extremely ineffective game. Obviously, they got beat 35-10 from a score standpoint. I thought a 0 might be too punitive in terms of a one-game ranking. Like I said, I think it ended up actually being a 4. If you omit the Week 4 score for the Bills and you omit their Week 18 score when they lost 23-16 to the Dolphins, they would significantly increase. I think they would end up being a 74.2. So I feel very comfortable with this ranking system for the Ravens, Lions, and Bills being right up there with each other in terms of efficiency and being among the top 3 in the ranking system. All right, so let's move on a little bit. I wanted to talk about the Eagles, the Seahawks, and the Chiefs a little bit, but I think I touched on that earlier on. What I initially found when I did all this manually was that 6 teams: Ravens, Lions, Bills, Chiefs, Eagles, Seahawks, had a tour of between 56 and 58 was the average. But I obviously had an elevated group, right? I had some of the best teams in the league, some of the best offenses in the league. I'm going to give you the category descriptors here. They're going to flow through. I'm not sure if they're going too fast. And they are quite high. They are quite, I would say, have a high standard, but keep in mind these are granular. So there's a granular decrease in the scores that are allotted. Each category basically is 10. The 11th category is a plus minus of 5. So you could theoretically, if you were perfect in all of these ratings, end up with a final score of a 105. I just realized that I left out the 11th category. Hopefully it generates through here in a moment, and you guys will be able to see it. It's for offensive penalty yards incurred. And the Ravens obviously were one of the worst at that. I wanted to encapsulate penalties, so I basically used that 11th one as a subtraction. But if you had 0 penalty yards incurred on the offense, then it's a plus 5 points because I feel like you're being efficient. But anyway, I did omit some games here. The Chiefs' Week 18 loss to the Broncos, 38-0 loss, I should say. I omitted that one. Buffalo's Week 18 loss to the Patriots. I did not omit Buffalo's Week 4 loss to the Ravens, although I gave you the information of what it could be. The Chiefs' score theoretically could have been as high as 68. I feel like that's a little high given the lack of scoring that they had in some of their games, particularly in the midseason and particularly against divisional opponents. In any case, here's the categories that I have for you, and I want to talk what Ty provided me. The website gave me just a ton of information and power at my hands. I began this project early in the summer, and I didn't think I'd be able to get all 32 teams' offensive data in. I quickly found out that finding all of this information each week when the games are played, finding it theoretically on Sunday nights, was going to be difficult. I even tested myself, and I was able to find, I think, 9 complete games in an hour and a half. And I thought, shit, this is taking way too long to find all of this information, then convert it to a Toer score. Basically, each category, each of the 10 categories is worth 10 points. 10 times 10 is 100. The 11th category is a plus or minus 5. So once again, you could have as much as 105 points scored. And then I whittled it down and thought, okay, maybe I will decrease my goals here and anticipate just doing the AFC North Ravens and the NFC North Lions, as well as maybe the Seahawks. So my goal coming out of probably 3 to 4 weeks of work was that. I'll just get those 2 divisions and the Seahawks, and I'll be happy with presenting that at some point Tuesday night. And then, like I said, out of nowhere, this dude Ty just writes a website that is ridiculous. And I'll let you guys have a look at it while I talk about some of the metrics a little bit. You're seeing me look at some of the data from 2024 for the Ravens and the Lions. This is pre-recorded. And then some historical teams. The Chiefs from 2018, the Patriots from 2007, the Broncos from 2013, and I believe maybe the Falcons from 2016. I'm not sure if I have those in here. But the 10 categories, I originally was running them through AI prompts on a daily basis to compile stats and then aggregate the Toer score based on that criteria, and it was wildly inconsistent. I mean, from day to day, different AI assistants would give me different scores. And, sometimes it was only off by 2 or 3 points, so that's important. There was still reliable information, still important information, I should say, but not wholly reliable, especially not to present to as many football fans as you guys that are educated and want exquisitely precise information. I think that's provided on this website. I am not capable of writing the code or the script to do that. He was, and I intend to use it as much as possible. On the left-hand side where it says select season, you will see that you can go all the way back to 1999. It's quite shocking. I have not yet gone back and looked at every single team's um, tour scores for previous seasons. I have done so for the Ravens. So the Ravens in 2024, historic offense, they led the league in this ranking. Uh, 2019, of course, was another historic offense under Greg Roman, Lamar Jackson's first MVP season. I believe their tour for that year was a 71.33. So it would have been, I think, fourth in the NFL this season behind the Ravens, Lions, and then Bills. The way that I weighted the points was meant to be honest with you, to make it very difficult to get a tour in the 90 range for a one game data point. And additional to that, I wanted to try to force as many scores as possible in between that 64 and 44 range and make the scoring quite granular, which I will not reveal all the scoring here. I'll give you an average score here in a couple of moments. If you've sat through this long, thank you very much. It's going to be probably another 10 or 15 minutes. This was a large scale goal of mine in the offseason for many reasons. I was interested in offensive efficiency prior to 2024 because of the Ravens, Lions, and Bills. I became even more interested in it. But to be upfront, I recognized that there was a pretty good chance that I was going to deal with copyright issues on YouTube once again in this season. And I jumped at the chance to create something that was non-film related that I can present every week as some content that was hopefully interesting, perfectly manicured and presented from the standpoint of the data, which I believe it is, thankfully to Ty and taking all of my categories and running them into the script or code or whatever the hell he did. I do want to talk about how this data goes back to 1999. I have found some historically great teams. You're seeing some of that information presented here. It makes it, truly remarkable what the Ravens did in 2024, right? In 2023, under Todd Monken, their tour was a 61. In 2022, Baltimore's last year under Greg Roman, their tour would have been, I think, a 53.2. 2019, under Greg Roman, that historic year, like I said, 71.33. I think there's some real correlation here with scores of 70 and above as an average over the year and great offenses. Denver Broncos 2013, you're seeing it, right? They scored over 200 points. Their tour 69.6, just below 70. They did have 4 games below that 64 threshold, which I consider to be, only one standard deviation above our current mean, formulated from just 2024 data. What I will do before the season starts is have a follow-up that shows the actual statistical mean for 2024, 2023, and hopefully 2022. Going back a little further, the Patriots' 17-0 season in 2007, they scored, of course, 589 points. Their tour was the same as the Broncos, 69.6. Identical. Puts things in perspective, if you ask me, for the Eagles and Chiefs in terms of their sub-70 scores for the output of the entirety of the 2024 season. Basically, I think it's a high standard to get above 70. I couldn't run the data for the 1999 St. Louis Rams. For whatever reason, only 15 games worth showed up and was pulled. So as a result, I don't feel comfortable going into it, but I will tell you it was a 56.4 tour for the whole season. I wouldn't give any weight or consideration towards that. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be gathering the 16th game. The 2018 Chiefs, as you see, they were 69.8. So, essentially a 70. 2016 Atlanta Falcons, a 65.9. I think my formula appears to be very demanding, perhaps even more so than I wanted initially. but I'm really pleased to present it to you here with the criteria for the 10 categories or 11 categories. It's been an incredible blessing to have this information at my fingertips here in the last couple of weeks. I want to present to you now what an average score would look like based upon what we have from a formulaic standpoint. So this is going to sit here, all 10 categories. It's a little bit smaller font, and I will talk about the category designations. These are statistical averages for the NFL for 2024. I want to be upfront about that. This is not statistical averages long term. This is just 2024. I did run this stuff through two different AI programs to double check it, and I was able to research, I think, 8 of these categories. Success rate was something that you got different information from. One had 44.2, one had 45, one had 45.4. I just basically took the middle of those three numbers. First downs, 19.6. Another website had 19.8. Points per drive was pretty ubiquitous in terms of 2.0 points per drive. So these are average scores for these categories. Basically, on a 0 to 10 scale, you would expect that 5 would be average. That is true in some cases. In some cases, 7 is actually the average number. So you will see that, like, so for example, yards per play, 5.4, 7 points is awarded, versus category number 3, completion percentage, 65%, 5 points is awarded. And both of those are the statistical mean from 2024. That is crafted. That is me working on the data as much as possible to ensure that the average output for each of these in a given game, given week, would be between 5 and 7. Essentially, 5 times 10 is 50, 7 times 10 is 70. I would anticipate that if a team is getting an average score for each category, they're not actually going to get 7 in all 10 categories. You're probably looking at somewhere in the 62 to 63 range. The idea, hopefully it makes sense already, is that I wanted it to be difficult to get above 78 or 80, and highly demanding, an incredibly high standard to get above 90. This basically here, this average score, I think would produce between 53 and 55 on the Toer criteria or Toer scale. Out of all the overall categories that are listed, this doesn't produce a subtraction. I didn't put penalty yards incurred here. Again, earlier I was shooting for a 56 to 58. Ties data from the website that he crafted or created for me found a 50.57. This is 53 to 55, depending on what you do with a couple of these categories where it's decimal oriented, right? Turnovers, category 2, 1.21. Sacks, 2.45. That's sacks allowed, 2.45. 2 sacks allowed would be 5 points. Take a look at the sacks allowed for the 2024 season, and you'll be surprised at what 2 sacks per game actually looks like, or a little below 2 sacks per game. Perhaps some people will say that category is a little bit too lenient, but I don't think so. Turnovers per game, again, is another one that you'll be surprised at if you go look at overall turnovers for the entirety of the season. In any case, these are statistical averages for all 32 teams. I think we've got a reliable and consistent grade scale that punishes offenses for negative outcomes, sacks, turnovers, offensive penalty yards lost. We're not concerned about time of possession. We're not concerned about total yards. We're not concerned about total points scored or points per game, because this is points per. We're relying on points per drive, 2.0, and then also play success rate, which is one that I am interested to see how that impacts this formula in the 2025 season. I'm going to show the data distribution one more time. If you had questions about the average score there, or you think some weaknesses in what I've provided, feel free to let me know in the comments section. I believe that we've got a strong indicator here in terms of a one-game measurement, and I'm both proud to be able to bring it to you, also a little perhaps nervous or anxious about it. I don't want. First of all, it's a different type of analysis, right? Hopefully you enjoy it. Maybe you don't enjoy this long form of content, but I've been waiting, sitting on this to try to get this out, and I thought now was a pretty good time. This type of analysis will not replace my film study. This is just an added approach, a different type of production that allows me to create some content absent the film every week. So there's a lot to say about that, right? This is, as I said, it was an idea that was born out of the Ravens, Bills, and Lions and how they played offense this past year, especially the Bills being able to change lanes, change gears, excuse me, and go try to high scoring and still not turn the football over, but also minimize risk and play a safer, conservative game, still be able to generate points like their division round win over the Ravens. I was excited to initially start this project, and once I encountered the tremendous mountain of data to gather, there was a pause, there was a freeze or a slowdown effect, and Ty's impact on this cannot be understated. The website basically produced an extremely high level of motivation, excitement for me to increase my production towards this, and so that's why there's so many graphics created here, so much information being provided. I don't know if it's too much. I'm not sure if it's the type that people want. I know that my first run with this will occur after week 1. And the update show for the whole league will probably be on Tuesday night. So I'll display the scores. I'll talk about where teams seem to be struggling. I will present the website as it was shown to you earlier, but I'm gonna try to color code it basically where red is below average, green or blue is average to above average, and something like purple is really good, or whatever color applies to a particular team. Definitely knew that when I began this, I was going to focus on the Ravens and Lions, Seahawks as well. And then now this is going to be so much fun to compare all 32 teams for the 2025 season. I don't know how this metric stacks up to others, right? Like DVOA and all the other things that are out there. Those things favor the top end offenses, and this, I think, quite obviously will as well. I tried to link this to more traditional data, but also be all about efficiency. Like I said, this has been an off-season long project for me. Thankfully, now I'm in a very blessed position because of Ty to be able to create a metric and present it to you quickly, more quicker than predicted each week, and it's based on real data, what actually happened, and that's important to me. I want it to be based on real data, not things that are expected to occur, and things that have, quote, too much variance. These are actual data points that you can find pretty much as soon as the games are over. And that's what I think the game of football is all about, is trying to present as comprehensive a look as we possibly can. This is my attempt to do so for you. I have no idea how many hours I've got into this project, but it was a lot, and things moved forward at an exponential rate once that website was available to me, so I'm so grateful. Anyway, this is a new offensive metric that I've created called Toer. It has a specific scoring criteria. It's designed and adjusted over the course of multiple trials to create traditional scores between 0 and 100. Rarely, however, are we going to get scores below 18 or below 21, somewhere in that area. Nor are we going to get many scores above 92 or 94. That did happen a couple of times in 24, both of those, in fact. The one thing I haven't talked about, maybe alluded to it a little bit early on, is my intention, my hope, to use this on the defensive side. And what I mean by that is track the defensive tour allowed for each team. For example, during the course of my work here, and especially after Ty completed the website and showed it to me, I was able to look at the teams that seemed to negatively impact opposing offense's efficiency the most, meaning they pulled the efficiency down even of the really good offenses. We've got points per game allowed, all the other information that's out there. But so, for example, let me give you some insight. The Ravens were, I think, 76.9 for 2024. But in week 11, in a road loss to the Steelers, they had a season low 41 Toer. 3 weeks later, in their home loss to the Eagles, 55. 3 of the teams that really negatively impacted efficiency last year was the Eagles, Bucks, and in some cases the Steelers defense. All of them seemed to pull the Toer ranking down for whoever they faced, at least according to the metric and data that I have available now. So what I'd like to do as part of my previews or information as a game gets closer is talk about what certain defenses are doing to opposing teams' Toer ranking. Are they pulling it down after the contest? Are they giving up a more efficient rating according to these 10, 11 categories? In any case, I hope you enjoyed this one. It became a project that was near and dear to my heart. I wanted to present it to people a lot more often, but I wanted to get it to the point where it was presentable. I think it is now. It'll be very separate from my film study videos. My goal is for it to be out on Tuesday nights. Not this long of a video, mind you, to be honest with you, but the data will be presented in a more concise fashion for others to go out and share on social media if they wish, if they think it's a reliable manner or way to judge NFL offenses. In any case, feel free to leave me feedback if you listen this long, whether you enjoy the statistical nature of it or not. I'm not sure if you listen this long. Hopefully you did. Maybe you think we didn't need another offensive metric, right? That's built by only one or two people. This wasn't a team effort, but if there's anyone who's willing or interested in this type of information / data, feel free to either comment on my YouTube channel or send me an email. My email is in the description, or send me a message on Twitter /X. I do have a Discord for anyone who is interested in this type of analysis and being a part of any of these projects. Essentially, my Discords are separated into Ravens fans community, a Lions community, and then a third one for the Seahawks fans as well. This was a whole lot of fun for me to begin this process. Hit a big lag, pause, uphill climb for a while, and then Ty's assistance, nudge, push, got the ball rolling downhill, and I'm eternally grateful for that. So this feels like an incredibly powerful tool that's available to access and report out on each week. And if you're interested at all and you want to join my Discord, it'll be available to you as well. Appreciate you guys' time. If you think other football fans might enjoy this heavily data-centric piece of content that I've put out here, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media so that other football fans can enjoy it as well. Appreciate you guys' time.